and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk About It with David Hill, or should I say, Hotep. We talked about a lot of things last week, and we seen a little bit of proof of some of the black heritage that has not been told us. Let's talk about the brother from Egypt, who was an Egyptian, who came over here in, I think it was 1978, and when he came over here, he had to comply as of getting a visa or what have you, something to that effect, to be able to become a citizen. I think he became a citizen in 1985. And the Department of Immigration told him that he would have to be classified as a white man, knowing that he was from Egypt. He was a black Egyptian, but they said he wouldn't get, I guess, the perks that go along with being white over here in America. We have a lot of those. And when he denounced his white classification, which is what they wanted to give him, immediately his job started treating him different, and a lot of things went on at that point in time. I have a little footage, so let's take a look at the footage. Let's take a look.
I am a black Egyptian. My father is much darker than I am. My mother is lighter than I am. In Egypt, people are identified by the religion first, not the race. So in Egypt, if you are Christian, you are a minority person. But if you're black, you're not a minority person. You are a part of the mainstream society. And I came from this background. And in Egypt, you identify as Arab and as Muslim. And in this country, when I first came, I identified myself as Arab American and Muslim first. And gradually, I became to identify myself as black. I came to the U.S. in 1978. And I became a U.S. citizen in 1985. When I became a U.S. resident, I was told by the Immigration and Naturalization that I am white. And I told them that I'm black, and they said, no, in this country, you are white. All Arabs in this country, all Arab immigrants are white. I didn't pay much attention in the beginning to this, because in the Arab world, we identify with our ethnicity first as Arabs, and then with the race second as black or white or whatever. But in this country, you identify with your racial group first and then with your ethnicity second. Gradually, I became black first and Arab second. And I rejected my white classification publicly for the first time in 1987, in February, as a panelist in a function sponsored by the Association of the Study of Black Life and History in Detroit. I said that I belong to two minority groups. I am Arab American and Black American, and I'm racially black and ethnically Egyptian. I was harassed by my employer right after that. I work for a white school district. The superintendent is white. All the associate superintendents are white, even though that we provide services to 30% black population. But the organization is white and the approach is very white. The attitude towards me changed completely after I went out publicly and rejected my white classification. One coworker came to me and told me, a white coworker came to me and told me right after the function that he met with the superintendent, and if I don't keep my mouth shut, my educational career is over. He said, you have nothing to do with these people, you have a history and a culture. These people came from the jungle, you have nothing to do with them. These people lie and steal. When I see one of them in my neighborhood, I call the police. And I was told by the director of general education, who is retired now, in '88, I was told by him that I get people angry when I say that I'm black Egyptian. If I just say that I'm Egyptian, I would get along. I have to add that I was denied promotion twice because I chose black classification. This is part of my 2 lawsuits against my employer, which are currently pending, 2 lawsuits.
Now, just for the education of our viewership, why don't you share with us a breakdown of Egypt as it is today, insofar as blacks or combinations thereof of European descent and what have you?
We don't have Egyptians of European descent in Egypt. We have a population which is basically a mixture of ancient Egyptian blacks who intermarried with Arabs right after the Arab conquest. The ancient Egyptian population was brown and black before the Arab conquest. But before the Arab conquest came the Greeks. It was the ancient Egyptian population was in Egypt for thousands of years. The ancient Egyptian population was brown and black. And the Greeks came in 300 BC. And they started to intermarry with the local population. And then the Romans came and ruled from 70 BC until they were conquered by the Arabs and kicked out by the Arabs in the 7th century. And these people intermarried with the Egyptian Copts, and they made the pigmentation of the Egyptians, the Copts, much lighter because of this intermarriage with Europeans.
Now, you're an educator, okay? Now, how do you deal with situations when you practice your profession insofar as dealing with the mythology or the misconceptions about Egypt being a white civilization? How do you deal with that?
This is a big problem because Egypt, the ancient Egyptian civilization was a black civilization, and ancient Egyptians were black according to the Greek scholars and the Roman scholars. Ancient Egypt became white only in the 19th century and in the 20th century. And the scholar who is responsible for this is Seligman, the noted anthropologist from England, Seligman. White supremacy argues that blacks are inferior than white intellectually. They are subhuman and they are incapable of building a civilization. White supremacy had one dilemma until Seligman came. The dilemma was ancient Egypt was black according to the Greek and the Roman scholars. 10 of them said that, including Aristotle and Plato. 10 of them said that in writing. They had this dilemma. Ancient Egyptian was black. So if blacks are inferior intellectually and are incapable of building a civilization, how come the ancient Egyptians built a civilization? Seligman found the solution for this dilemma. He came up with a theory called the Hemite theory. He separated the blacks who built a civilization in Egypt and Ethiopia from the rest of the black race, and he called them brown-skinned whites, or the Hemites. So Seligman saved white supremacy from this dilemma, and all the white scholars followed him from that time on. This was at the end of the 19th century. And since that time, white scholarship says that ancient Egypt is white.
Mostafa Hefny is currently working on his doctorate degree at Wayne State University. His dissertation topic is a content analysis of the treatment of ancient Egypt in world history textbooks. And just how far is this determined Egyptian willing to go to be classified black?
I want to carry my case all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court if necessary.
So what did you think of what happened? I mean, what are your thoughts and views on what happened to this black man, and how come he was, or as they put us, as to be like a poor black trash, or thieves, or thugs, is how they portray us to be here in America, or should I say America now? It's always been America. But let's take a look at something else. Let's find out what happened to black Egypt. Let's look how they turned it white. Let's take a look at that.
We all know white Egypt is a joke, but how did that lie even get started? And how did the Euro clowns sell the idea of whites in Africa anyway? With Napoleon's incursion into northern Africa in the early 19th century, Egypt had finally come back to the white world's attention. While Napoleon's troops were busy giving the Sphinx a nose job, Francois Champollion, a fellow Frenchman, was deciphering the hieroglyphs. Both Champollion and Count de Volney attested to the Egyptians having been Africans. At this time, not even one European or Arab said the Egyptians were white, but then again Champollion and de Volney were not racialists. Unfortunately, it wasn't long after France reminded the white world of Egypt's glory that the white supremacists from the US and Britain rushed to Africa. The white world hadn't taken an interest in Egypt since the time of the Romans, and the Europeans had never cared about Egypt at all. So why the sudden interest? What had changed? What had changed was that there was now a white supremacy myth that was the flimsy glue holding the white world together, and these twisted minds converging on Africa realized that myth was about to come undone. But the white revisionists had one major advantage: the public's ignorance. Black Egypt was merely common knowledge in the global mind, not an established fact. Since mass production of books didn't exist yet, the public had no specific pictures of the Egyptians' own artwork or translation of their writings to attach blackness to. It would be no problem for the revisionists to get the white academic world behind them. After all, the doctrines of black inferiority came from white universities. Most of the book and magazine publishers were white university men, just like the white supremacists who were rewriting Egypt's history. Not only would these colleagues eagerly publish these lies, they'd also ensure anything to the contrary simply wouldn't be printed in books or magazines. The cool, rational analyses of men like Herodotus and Champollion had now been outlawed. The racists were about to rewrite history. These men created Egyptology, the first racial philosophy masquerading as a science. From now on, the Egyptians would no longer be the last word on their own world. White scholars would be the authorities now. They began the whitewashing of Egypt using the popular medium of that day: books. This is a scene of Egyptian women drawn by the Egyptians' own hands. See any pale skin, any blonde hair or blue eyes? But this was what the whites put in their books. This is an image of Princess Kemsit. Her name means the Black Lady. Notice she's being tended by white slaves. But in white books, they showed the opposite. Queen T, King Tut's grandmother, and her husband Amenhotep III. You can guess what whites did with those two. And with the advent of movies, their propaganda now had the advantage of sound and moving pictures. No one realized it at the time, but whites were manufacturing their own image library. Since there were no images of white Egyptians, whites simply decided to fabricate their own. Every few years we see another big-budget propaganda piece. Different stories, but always the same lie. And after 100 years of this, the whites' manufactured images are now more familiar to the world than any of the ancient Egyptians' authentic pieces, which whites almost never show. In a world where most people get their information from TV, and they think that what they see in the movies is somehow real, is it any surprise that whites could use their media monopoly to sell the biggest lie in history? And so, black skin would be called tanned. The Egyptians would be reimagined as the same race as the vile Asiatics who they detested. White people would have dreadlocks and kinky hair now. The Nubians would be cast as the authentic blacks. The white writers would try to falsify a contrast between them and the newly minted white Egyptians. The white authors would talk about ancient Egypt, but they used terms meant to remind people of the world of the 19th century. This helped create a false association in the reader's mind between Egypt's mostly winning its wars with Nubia and the European conquest in Africa, as well as slavery in America. All they had to do was leave out 90% of the facts and keep repeating their revised version until it stuck. Here's an example of how they did it. This image is a reproduction that is shown in nearly every white-authored book on Egypt, Tut slaying the Nubians. Whites like to point out that some of the Nubians are jet black. But they always conveniently omit that most of the Nubians are shown as being the same reddish-brown color as Tut and having red hair like Ramses II. And not one of those books will dare show the image on the other side of this funerary box found in Tut's tomb, because it shows Tut riding his chariot over whites who don't look anything like him in form or color. And if this picture of Tut warring with a handful of Nubians who look just like him is proof that the Egyptians hated blacks, then what does it mean when Ramses III rides over an entire ocean of Caucasoids? For whites, it means, no way in hell are we going to print this. This image of a rough-looking black prisoner is another white favorite because of his full lips and flared nostrils, even though Nefertiti has the same features. And neither one of them looks like this white slave. Here's another picture you'll see in all the white books on Egypt. And here's one you won't. White POWs being tortured. Ramses killing a white man while his wife watches in admiration. No Nubians were ever treated like this. Ramses has 3 captives, but only one of them is black. The other 2 are Asiatic and Semitic. Thutmose III has so many whites by the hair you can't even count them. Pictures of the Egyptians torturing and killing whites far exceed the handful showing the same old pictures of Nubian POWs. Yet white writers rarely mention whites as slaves or prisoners. They only say a few sentences about that, and of course they never show the pictures. This is a 200-year-old propaganda war to achieve one sole purpose: deceive the reader into thinking of Egypt and black as 2 separate things. And 2008 was no different. After 30 years of African American scholars proving Egypt was really black, National Geographic put out this feculent propaganda piece. Instead of calling it the Nubian pharaohs, which at least would have been accurate, they called it the black pharaohs, still maintaining the lie that Egypt was white. The caption on this picture says, "Did Queen T have Nubian ancestry? This bust, darkened with age, inspired claims that she did." That's 3 lies for the price of 1. First of all, what proof do they offer that this bust has darkened with age? None. No scientific analysis, no tests of any sort. They simply say it and expect you to buy it. And they don't give us any Egyptian writings or scientific analyses to support this Nubian tea crap either. So who's making these so-called claims then? The editorial board at National Geographic. That's who. They just insert their own unfounded racist opinions into every article and act like that alone is proof. If they're going to say one of Egypt's most celebrated queens was a foreigner, shouldn't they have to back it up with something? What if a black person said, "Was Queen Nefertiti Asiatic? This bust, which has faded with age, has inspired claims that she was." National Geographic would run a front-page story challenging that the sculpture had faded and demanding to know exactly who made those Asiatic claims. Here's another question. If Queen T was Nubian, doesn't that mean her grandson, King Tut, was part Nubian as well, and that this pale reconstruction is a complete fraud? Because the Euro clowns at National Geographic have never said Tut's sculptures have darkened with age. So if Tut's grandmother was black, and National Geographic concedes that his sculptures are accurate to his skin tone, why did they make him look like Casper the Friendly Ghost then? Because it's never been about Egypt. It's about supporting the myth of white supremacy that undergirds European power today. The Euro clowns realize they're losing. Not long ago they said no blacks built Egypt. Now that science has proven them wrong, they're trying to claim the Ethiopians are Caucasians. Because many Ethiopians have narrow noses, whites think they can use that to claim Ethiopians aren't like those other Africans who have bones in their noses and plates in their lips. I guess no one ever told the Europeans that it's the Ethiopians, like the Surma and Mercy tribes, who put plates in their women's lips. So if Ethiopians really are Caucasians, then that means it's whites who don't have any better sense than to put dinnerware in their mouths. Didn't see that one coming, did we? Maybe next time you'll think before you lie. Whites have been taught to worship themselves. Perhaps they should have chosen another god. One who was smarter.
Now you've seen how they've turned Egypt white by means of their books, their movies. Basically, the movies was the biggest way they changed black Africa to being white or everything but black. I mean, why do you hate me so bad, but you're always trying to be exactly like me? Like I said, you go to the movies. They got the movie out now called The Gods of Egypt. And it's an insult to me and my people to see some really white boy play Osiris in this movie. Osiris is set in the side. These were all black people. Him, his brother, and his wife. And then they portray Horus, the sun, also as being a white boy. They weren't white. Osiris, his very name means Lord of the perfect black. How could any white man have a name to reflect anything like that? Well, this is just another way that they push their white superiority over us. You're not that old. I told you before, we are the oldest. Stop laying down for these people who are beneath us, because they are. They learned everything that they knew from us. Trust me, they did. All you got to do is look it up. Well, family, this concludes another episode of Let's Talk About It with David Hill. Y'all have a good night.